Tonight, I want to speak about a topic when bad things happen to good people. And I have to just give a disclaimer. I'm going to do my best. I'm probably not going to do it perfectly. And I hope you don't walk away with more questions than you came in with. But I'm going to make an attempt to try to explain it to you as best I can, and through the work that I've been doing over the years on this topic and what I've been thinking about. And I have to admit that it's probably the most important question as Jews that we do have to think about. Why bad things happen in life, why there is pain, why there is suffering. And all of you are old enough to realize that life doesn't just float by without difficulties. Things happen in life. Sickness happens, and pain happens, and things that we wish didn't happen, they happen. And yet, we live in a world where, as Jews, we believe in the God. We believe in the Almighty. So we have an obligation to understand how it fits all together. How can God be there and love us, and at the same time create a world in which we experience pain, and there's real pain in this world? That's the challenge that I'm going to take on tonight. And it might be too big a task, it probably is, but I'm going to try to answer it a little bit. So bear with me and don't go for the jugular too early. Give me a chance, and I hope I'll say something that'll be meaningful. You know, I first started getting into this topic when I was a young rabbi, and I had my first funeral to do. So one of my students' father passed away, and she called me up and asked me if I would do the funeral. So I said I would. There's only one problem. I never met her father before. And when you do a funeral, you have to speak about the deceased. So how do you speak about somebody who've never met and sound a little bit sincere? So what's the trick as rabbis? What do? You call the family members up. So I called the person's family, called different relatives. I called her sister. And her sister said to me on the phone, she said, "You know, Rabbi, my father had a perfect life." I said, "What do you mean by a perfect life?" And she said, he never was sick in a day in his life. He never suffered. He was never sick. Until the last 3 months of his life, he was miserable. He had a tremendously aggressive pancreatic cancer, and he was in pain for 3 months. So she said to me, "I wish he had died 3 months before, and he would have had a perfect life." So I said to her what I thought were words that would console her. And I said to her, "You know, if we understood how good pain can be for us in this world, we might even ask God for more." So I was a young rabbi. I hear silence at the other end of the line. And she says to me, "Rabbi, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. I've never heard anything dumber than that." And I'm listening to that going, "Oh my gosh, what did I just say to her?" And she said, "Rabbi, I can't accept that. That makes absolutely no sense to me." And I hear a click at the other end of the phone. And I was pretty upset. Here I was trying to comfort a mourner, and instead of comforting a mourner, what did I do? I caused this mourner more pain. So I felt pretty bad about it. But then I realized that I said something to her which was true to me, but was not true to her in the world that she was living in, and in the way that she was looking at the world. So although that was true in my mind and in my world, that understanding, I realized I said something to her which was foreign to her ears. So I took it upon myself, instead of giving a eulogy the next day, or part of my eulogy was going to be that I was going to explain how we understand pain in this world. So I stayed up all night, and I did a lot of research. I started preparing my speech, and I presented it to her. And I gave a eulogy in the process, but I also gave some of these ideas. And some of the things I'm going to share with you tonight are some of the things I said then. And I was watching her as I spoke. I had my eye on her, and I could see that she was getting it. I could see tears rolling up in her eyes. And afterwards she came up to me and she said to me, "Rabbi, thank you." I understand why my father had to live these extra 3 months. So I think we can explain it, but it requires shifting our minds a little bit and looking at the world in a little bit of a different way. So my request from everybody here tonight is just shift your minds with me a little bit and don't get emotional. Let's stay rational. And if we do that, I think we'll walk away with something very important on how to understand the pain of our lives. Let's begin like this. There's a famous book in the marketplace called When Bad Things Happen to Good People by a rabbi, a Reformed rabbi, Harold Kushner. Has anybody seen it? When Bad Things Happen to Good People? It's a famous book that people buy, and when someone passes away, people often give it. This Reformed rabbi, Harold Kushner, so he had a very tragic incident in his family. His son was born with a genetic disease in which he aged at an extremely fast rate. By the age of 12, he had aged as if he was 80. Can you imagine that? A little boy, 12 years old, who had already decayed, so to speak, like an 80-year-old. A very rare genetic disease. So his father has to live with his son for 12 years and is watching him slowly dying, and it inspired him to write a book about why bad things happen to good people. And let me tell you what he says in the book. He says that in order to understand God, there are 3 things we have to know. The 3 most important things we have to understand about the Almighty is, number 1, He is all-knowing. So that's to say, if God is all-knowing, He knows my son is sick. He knows about it. Not only does God know about it, we even have to take it a step further. You know, oftentimes people make this mistake, when somebody's sick in their family and they start praying to God and say, God, I got to tell you, my great-great-uncle is sick and, he needs a refuah, he needs a cure, and we start praying. Sometimes we think we have to inform God. We don't have to inform God. God knows about it. Not only does He know about it, He's the source of it. He's the cause. Who do you think caused it? God. So God knows about it. The second thing you have to know about God is all-powerful. He's omnipotent. All-powerful means He knows about it and He could change it if He wants to. So God, if my son is sick, why aren't you changing it? You could change it if you want to. Number 3, and this is the most important one, God is all-loving. The word God actually comes from the word good. The essence of God is He's good. He's the ultimate kindness, the ultimate giver. He loves us beyond anything we can imagine. God's love and mercy and compassion is, we can't even imagine what it is. God is all loving, and everything He does in this world is an act of love. Everything. Everything. So this person writing the book wrote, he said, listen, God, you're all powerful, you're all knowing, and you're all loving. I don't want to throw away your being all loving because I need your love. I don't want to throw away your being all knowing. So you know what? It must be that you're not all powerful all the time. There are some things that you just can't control. Sometimes people get sick and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what he wrote. What's the problem with that? The problem is that he's saying that there are things that occur in this world which are random, occur by chance. God can't control it. And I'll tell you, my friends, that's the opposite of what we believe. The opposite. There was someone that my mother knew, and she called my mother up one day, and she was very upset. Her daughter, unfortunately, tragically died in a car accident in St. Louis. Only daughter. 22 years old, in law school in St. Louis. And she died in a car accident. So a certain, I don't want to say who, certain person told her, you just can't think about it. Things just happen. Sometimes things just happen randomly in this world, and there's no reason for it. So she called my mother, and she said to my mother, if there's no purpose behind the death of my daughter, I cannot go on living. So my mother said, why don't you call my son, he's an Orthodox rabbi, and speak to him. So she called me up, and we started speaking on the phone, and I said to her, I don't know what you heard, but erase it from your mind. Forget it. Let's start from the beginning. Let's begin over. So I said to her like this. I said, what we have to understand about this world is there's no such thing as randomness. In fact, you look at the Hebrew language, there is no word for chance. Isn't that interesting? In the language that was created by God, the Hebrew language, which is, we'll speak about in another lecture, in the Hebrew language, the language that God created, which defines reality, there's no word for chance. You know why there's no word for chance? Because chance isn't a reality. Chance doesn't exist. When something happens in this world, it's directly from God. In fact, the word that we use in the Hebrew language for by chance, does anyone know Hebrew? What's the word? What do we use for chance? What's the word we use for, we say that happened by chance? What, no? Kara or kacha just means so, but it's a better word. What do we say? We say ba mikra. Ba mikra. You heard that word, ba mikra? In modern Hebrew, it means by chance. You know what the word really means? What's that?
It means all of a sudden.
That's like ba mikra, we say, like, but really the root of that word is kara. It was called. It was called out. Like kore. Kara. And if you look at the word even differently, mikra means, kara me aleph. Called out from Hashem. There's no word in the Hebrew language for chance. You know why? Because there's no such thing as chance. We believe that God is micromanaging this creation. God is so involved in every cell and every molecule that He knows about what's happening and He's causing it. Our rabbis say, how far does this go? How far is God involved in your life? So there's an amazing statement our rabbis say. It says like this, if you go 40 days without experiencing any pain from God, it means God doesn't love you. Has anyone gone 40 days without experiencing any pain in their lives? If you have, it means God doesn't love you. So a rabbi said, well, what does it mean, no pain from God? So you know what one rabbi says? One rabbi says it means like this. You get up in the morning, and your eyes are all blurry, and you go to your drawer, and you start putting on your shirt, and you end up putting it on inside out. That was God causing you to do something, communicating to you. Another rabbi says it's even deeper than that. It's sometimes, have you ever gone to a sale? This happens to me sometimes. You go to a shoe sale. You go to one of the stores, to buy shoes. And I'm a size 11. So you look at all the boxes, and I'm looking for that 11 over there, and I see a 10 and a half, I see 11 and a half, I see a 12, I see a 9 and a half. I'm looking for the 11. There's always that same girl who works in all the shoe stores all over Queens, right? The one who stocks the shoes. And you always ask her the question, well, do you have anything in the back room? Do you have 11s in the back? And what's the answer you always hear? No. What's ever out there, that's all we have. You're like, oh, darn. Perfect price, perfect color. Oh, you know what the Talmud says? That's the Almighty speaking to you. That's God bringing pain into your life. You want a piece of clothing, it's on sale, it's the right color, the right style, and it's not there for you. That's God speaking to you. Another rabbi says it goes even deeper than that. He says you go to the store to buy something. It costs three quarters. You reach into your pocket, you reach for 3, and you pull out 2. So you have to go back in a second time to get that third. That's God speaking to you. To that extent, God is micromanaging His creation. A rabbi they asked the question one time, and they said, what do you mean, God is involved in everything? How can that be? How is God involved in that leaf over there? So he said, let's watch. So the wind starts blowing, blows the leaf off the tree. They watch the leaf flow and move in the wind. They watch it, they walk past it. They see it land on the ground. They go to the point where it lands, and under the leaf, they notice there's a caterpillar. The sun was beating its rays directly on the caterpillar. That leaf landed directly on the caterpillar, sheltered the caterpillar from the hot sun, and enabled the caterpillar to become a butterfly. And from that, our rabbis say that God is managing every leaf that falls off the tree. That's God's involvement in our lives. There's no such thing as randomness. The question that we have to deal with then is if there's no such thing as randomness and God knows about it and God is all-powerful and He loves us, how can pain possibly be a manifestation of God's love? How does it work? How can it be? And we have to answer this question. We have to know it. There was a very great, there's a famous, anybody psychology major? Anyone study psychology? A very famous work on cognitive therapy called Man's Search for Meaning by a psychotherapist named Viktor Frankl, Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a Jew who went through the Holocaust, went through Auschwitz, and based on his experience, he wrote a book called what he calls logotherapy, which means trying to find meaning in life. And he posits a certain theory. His theory works like this. He says that depression equals suffering minus meaning. People get depressed, why? Because they suffer and can't find meaning for the suffering. But if you can create meaning for why you're suffering, you can stay off depression. And he said while he was in Auschwitz, while he was in a concentration camp, he practiced this. He said there was a man who said to him, you know, my wife died this morning and I'm so depressed, I don't want to go on living. So he said to this man, he said to him, listen, you know, let's try to find some meaning in her death. Think of it this way. Think how pained she would be if she had to watch you die. The fact that she died before you spared her that pain of her having to watch you die. And you know what the man said? He said, thank you, I'm comforted. And Viktor Frankl wrote a whole work on this. He said, depression equals suffering minus meaning. Now we as Jews don't stop there. We as Jews go a step further. You know what we say? It's true that depression equals suffering minus meaning. But we say, God, what's the real purpose for the meaning? Let's not make up a purpose. God, if it's from you, there has to be real purpose. We just can't see it. And that's the problem in life. The difficulty in life is that we see only a snapshot of what is going on. We don't see the whole picture. You know, our rabbis say that our vision in this world oftentimes is like somebody looking through a keyhole. When you look through a keyhole, what do you see? You see a glimpse of what's happening in a room. And it could be like this. You're looking through a keyhole, and all of a sudden you see a man with a knife, and he has a mask on, and you see him raise his hand, and you hear a scream, and what do you want to do? Call 911, but you're feeling brave, so you kick open the door, you rush in, and what do you discover? Discover it was your friend who just graduated from NYU dental school, you know, about to do a root canal. But because that you only saw a glimpse of what was happening, what did you think? You thought this must be terrible. The reality is, my friends, God says to us, if you want to understand the whole picture, you have to be there from the beginning. You have to have been there when I created the world, and you have to have watched as things unfolded. Because if you don't, you'll miss it. You won't see how God is operating. And you'll think what God is doing that's really bad is oftentimes really very good. Now I'll tell you something, my friends. Another piece of information we need to have is this. As Jews, we have a very unique definition of what is good. In our minds, we tend to think, well, good is if I have a good job, my health is good, I have a nice car, I have a good husband, I have a good wife, I have enough money to pay for what I need. You know, that's a good life. I can lie back on the beach. That's good. That's not the definition of goodness in Judaism. You know what the definition of goodness is? I'm going to change the definition for you. The definition of something being good is if it's purposeful. If it's purposeful. Sometimes things can be very purposeful, but very painful. Can you think of an example? What in life is very purposeful, but very painful? Work. Work is very purposeful, very painful. Good.
Childbirth.
Childbirth. How about childbirth? Usually I hear this from the ladies. I had it from the men over there. I was there at all 6 of my children's births, and I can declare that it's painful. It's not to scare anybody off, but it's also very purposeful and very good. But God is teaching us something. He's teaching us that things that can be very painful are the most purposeful. Sometimes we see that in medicine also.
Like a speeding ticket.
Maybe. It's painful, but it's purposeful. Maybe we'll stop you from speeding and avoiding the next accident. Yeah. Slow down and maybe the person won't get killed. Chemotherapy. Chemotherapy. Is it painful?
Very.
Is it purposeful?
Yes.
If something is purposeful, we say it's good. We don't say just Goodness does not mean comfort. Goodness means purpose. I'll tell you an example of what I mean. I'll try to describe it for you. You can imagine the following scenario. There's a man, and his dream is when he retires, all he wants to do is go on that cruise. He's going to, he retires, he works for 35 years. He says, when I retire, I'm going to do that cruise I've always wanted to do. So what happens? He retires. Finally, he's able to take his cruise. He gets all dressed up. He has one of those white, suits and a white big Panama hat. And he books one of the best rooms on one of the best cruise ships. And finally, he's living his dream. He's out on the cruise. And he's spending his morning lying in the sun and just enjoying it and drinking martinis and other drinks. And he's having the greatest time of his life. Oh, finally my dream has come true. All of a sudden, he hears a splash. And someone yells, "A child just fell over." And he goes, "Oh my gosh." And he looks and he sees this little child, this little boy in the water, struggling. Without thinking, he jumps over the ship and he starts grabbing the boy. And the boy is thrashing in the water and scratching his face. And as he's trying to pull the boy above the water, he's swallowing salt water. Finally, he gets hold of the boy, and the sailors throw down a life rope, and he grabs it, and they pull him and the boy up. And he's shivering from the cold water. He has hypothermia. And he has to spend the rest of the cruise in the sick bay. But during this time, he gets, he and the boy become friends. And they keep in touch. At the end of his life, they asked this man, what was the most meaningful part? What was the most meaningful moment of your life? And you know what he says? I was once on a cruise ship, and I saved the boy's life. And they said, "You saved the boy's life?" He said, "Yes. That was the most meaningful moment of my life." And if you think about it, think about all the joy that he gets in that moment of thinking about he saved the boy's life. But when he thinks about it, wait a minute. Instead of absorbing the warm rays of the sun, he's drinking the cold water of the ocean. Instead of having his face beautifully tanned, he has scratch marks from the boy's fingernails on his face. Instead of sitting out in an armchair for the week like he planned, he sat in a bed in the infirmary down below. And he looks back at it and he says, that was the greatest moment of my life. It was the most uncomfortable moment of my life, but it was the most purposeful moment of my life. And we understand when there's purpose in something, it doesn't matter if there's discomfort. Because if there's purpose, we know that has to be good. Life is about purpose. And when I live purposefully, I can even live with pain if I know there's purpose in my pain. He knew there was purpose in his pain. He saved the boy's life. And he could look back at him and say it was the greatest moment of my life. The challenge of life, my friends, is this. Is to realize that we don't see the whole picture. And when we're going through painful situations, there's purpose in the pain. But we have to have the strength of trust and emunah to realize there's more than we can see. I'll tell you a true story. In the early part of the 20th century, there was a lot of poverty in Europe, in Lithuania and Poland, and a lot of Jews came to America. This one particular man, because of the poverty in Lithuania, felt he had to take his whole family, transplant them to America. What did he do? He sold his house, and he sold his business, and with the money, he brought train tickets and boat tickets. Now to get from Lithuania, which is in Poland, to America, it's a difficult journey. One has to go by train to Warsaw. Warsaw then has to take another connecting train actually to the nearest port. From that port, one has to sail on a boat to England. And in England, one has to take a connecting boat to New York. That's how difficult it was to come to America in the early part of the 20th century. This man put all of his money in tickets for him and his 6 children. The first leg of the journey was supposed to be at 8 a.m., the train from his town to Warsaw. He comes to the train station at 20 to 8 with his children to wait for the 8 o'clock train. As he arrives at the train station, he notices is a train chugging away. And he looks and he says to the station master, that train over there, what train is that? And the station master says, yeah, that's the 8 o'clock train. I can't explain it, but it left early today. He said, it left early today? It's supposed to come at 8 o'clock. He said, I don't know why, it left early. He said, well, when's the next train? He said, tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock? That doesn't work. I have to get to Warsaw. From Warsaw, I have only a certain amount of time. I have to get to the nearest port. I forget which one it is. And from there, I have to take, we have tickets on a boat to England. And in those days, if you miss the boat, you don't get your money back. It's not like today where they bump you and put you on, the next flight. So he said, the next train is tomorrow. How am I going to get to Warsaw? And the station master says, listen, I'm sorry, but I can't explain it. So this gentleman was devastated. He sold his house and his business to buy tickets, and those tickets were worthless. He came back to the town where they lived, and people who knew him saw his face, say he aged overnight. He aged. In those few hours, his face was gray, just aged. I said, what happened? He said, I have nothing left in the world. I am completely poor. And I have no way out. And he was devastated. 2 weeks later, he comes running into the synagogue, and he says, I have to bench gomel. You know what it means to bench gomel? When your life has been saved, there's a special blessing that we make. Shigemani kol tov. He said, I have to bench gomel. He said, what are you talking about? He said, I have to bench gomel. He goes in, he says the bracha, everyone says, Amen. So what do you mean your life's been saved? We've seen the last 2 weeks, nothing's happened. He said, I just got word. Remember, I was supposed to take a train to Warsaw. From there to the port in Poland. From there, I was supposed to take a boat to England with my family. And from England to America, I just found out that that boat from England to America sunk. You know what the name of that boat was? Titanic. It's a true story. Happened to the uncle of Rabbi Ordman, a lecturer who speaks often for us. A wonderful person. Now, I was thinking about that story. Imagine this man is standing on the platform, watching the 8 o'clock train chug away. And he says to the station master, what happened over here? I thought that, it's supposed to come. The station master said, I can't explain it. It's never left early before, but it left early. I don't know why. He said, but what about my tickets? I don't have anything left. And imagine he would turn up to the Almighty and say, Rabbonu Shalom, God, how can you do that to me? I'm a believing Jew. I keep kosher. I keep Shabbos. I educate my children in Torah. I'm so careful about kashrut. I give charity. I give tzedakah. How could you do that to me, God? If you could hear God's response, you know what I think it might sound like? Listen, you big dope. I just saved your life. Just saved your wife's life. I just saved the life of your 6 children. But you're going to have to wait 2 weeks to realize what I did for you. Sometimes we have the advantage of seeing what happened 2 weeks later. But sometimes it takes even more than 2 weeks. There's a wonderful book out there called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust by a woman named Yafa Eliach. And she tells the following true story about somebody, a baker who lives up in Muncie. He died recently. He lived in Muncie, New York, and he survived the Holocaust. And she said to him, tell me, how did you survive? So he said, let me tell you what happened. He said, the Nazis came to my town, and they rounded up my whole family, and they put them on trains and they deported them. And I didn't know where they went, but I knew it wasn't a good place. But I said that I am going to survive, and my sister is going to survive. He had one sister, little sister. His sister was beautiful. And he said, I am going to live for my sister. This girl is going to survive. So he hid her every time the Nazis came to round them up, he hid her and hid her and hid her. He found a hiding place. He was positive that Nazis would not find them. One day he comes back to the hiding place where they were staying, and his sister's not there. So he says to the people around, "What happened?" So the Nazis were here an hour ago. They took your sister. So he said, without even thinking, he was a kid about 15. So without even thinking, he ran to the house where the Nazi commanders had their office, where the Nazi police station was in the town. They took over houses and made them their station. He ran to the house. Without knocking, he runs in. And he says, "I want my sister back now." And this Nazi looks at him. Says, "You want your sister back, you Jew? I'll give you your sister back, dead." He says, "I want her back now." He says, "Get out of here, you Jew, before I kill you too." The commander of this police station comes down and says, "What's happening over here?" And this man says, "This Jew wants his sister back." So this Nazi captain says to him, "I'll give you your sister back under one condition, that you have hair growing on the palm of your hand." You know, and maybe you don't know this, but in Christian theology, the devil has hair on his hand. And when he shows you that palm with hair, that's a sign he's going to kill you. So he says, I'll give your sister back if you have hair growing on the palm of your hand. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out his hand, thick black hair on the palm. The Nazi looks and says, "Oh, the devil, get your sister and get out of here." He grabs his sister. He runs and runs and runs as fast as he could. He and his sister survived the war. So Mrs. Eliach, Professor Eliach, is interviewing him in Muncie. Says, "That's an amazing story. Please show me the palm of your hand." He opens up the palm of his hand. Thick black hair on the palm of his hand. And she says, "Wait a minute, that's impossible. Everyone knows that hair does not grow on the palm of your hand. There are no hair follicles on the palms of our hand." So he said, "Let me tell you a story. I'm a baker. My father was a baker also in Poland. When I was a little boy of 7 years old, I was working in his bakery. One day as I was working, my hand got caught in the bread slicing machine, and it tore off the palm of my hand. In those days, they had very primitive skin grafts. They took some skin from a part of his body, probably the thigh or something like that, and they grafted it on. But because they grafted skin to his palm from a part of the body where there were hair follicles, where hair grew, hair continued to grow on the palm of his hand." Now, you can imagine, that's the year 1929. Or let's say it's 1930. The Nazis came in 1941. You have a little boy there, he's 6, 7 maybe. His hand gets caught in a bread slicing machine. And the little boy is screaming, and there's blood everywhere. And his mother is bandaging it, and they're doing this primitive skin graft. And this mother turns up to heaven and says, "God, what do you want from him? He's a little boy. He's an innocent little boy. Did he do anything wrong? Did he hurt anybody? All he does is he keeps Shabbat, he keeps Kashrut. He never hurts anyone. He's pure and innocent. How could you do such a thing?" You know, I think if you could hear God's response, I think it would sound something like this. "Listen, you big dope. I just saved your son's life. Not only did I save your son's life, I saved your daughter's life as well. Because you're not going to know this. Because right now everything is peaceful in Poland. But in about 9 years, the Germans are going to attack, and they're going to round up the Jews, and it's going to be a terrible, terrible situation. But because of this accident now, your son and your daughter are going to survive." You know, my friends, sometimes you see God's plan in 2 weeks. Sometimes you see it 10 years later. But you don't only see it right now. And our job is to have the faith and the trust to know that we don't see the whole picture. And we have to give God time to unravel the story. You know, if you don't see the end of the movie, you don't know what happened. It's like walking in the middle and being confused. But we have to understand that we don't see it. We see a little piece of the puzzle. But if we give ourselves time, God will show us the end. And we will see it. And David HaMelech, King David, tells us something very interesting. King David says an amazing verse. And we say this verse every time we make a blessing just before we make a blessing over our bread. We say, Shir Amalos. And we say to the Almighty, we say, God, King David says this. He said, when Mashiach comes, Hayinu kecholmim, which means, does anyone know what that means? Hayinu kecholmim, which means we were like dreamers. And oftentimes we read that verse of King David and we say, oh, we were like dreamers. I mean, when Mashiach comes, it's going to be a beautiful world. It's going to be a dream world. You know what King David is teaching us? No. When Mashiach comes and God's going to show us how everything was purposeful and everything was part of God's love, you know what we're going to say to God? My gosh, we were like dreamers. We lived in the year 2009 and we didn't understand that the Holocaust was a manifestation of your love. It was like living in a dream world. This is the dream world right now because we don't see the whole picture. King David says when Mashiach comes, we're going to look back at our lives. We're going to say, my gosh, we were in the fog. We were in a dream. How could we not have seen God's love? We don't always see it. You have to have a little patience. I'll tell you one more story. I was at a barber in Kew Garden Hills. And a guy walks in. And he says to the barber, he said, could you please do a mitzvah? And I said, the barber looked at him and said, a what? He said, a mitzvah. And barber's kind of confused. Never heard the word mitzvah before. And I'm looking at this guy. I said, did you mean mitzvah? He said, that's what I said, mitzvah. So he said, well, what's the mitzvah? He's like, I don't have much money. Could you cut my hair for half price? So the barber kind of hemmed and hawed, but I think out in the end that maybe he agreed. The reason this guy said mitzvah is because he was an Ethiopian Jew. He was a black Jew from Ethiopia. And the pronunciation that they use in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Jews, they don't say the va, they say a W there. They don't say mitzvah, they say mitzvah. So he was from Ethiopia. You know, there are black Jews in Ethiopia. They're called falashas. But I'll tell you something very interesting. In 1988, there was an operation called Nitza. It was Mitzvah Moshe. In this operation, the Israeli Air Force, together with El Al and the Israeli Mossad, went into Ethiopia, and the airlifted in one night over 10,000 Ethiopian Jews out of Ethiopia and into Israel. So Ethiopia at that time, it was dangerous for the Jews. So in one night, El Al planes went in together with the Israeli army, and they took out over 10,000 Ethiopian Jews. Very impressive operation. Very impressive, because it meant they had to have coordinators in Ethiopia telling people to meet at this point and get to that truck and going to meet the plane over here. It took weeks and weeks of planning, and in one night 10,000 Jews landed in Israel. And people woke up in Israel the next morning and were amazed at what happened. It was like Entebbe again. You know, Entebbe in 1976. Wow, you know, the Israeli Air Force does it again. You know, the Jews do it again. One night, pull out 10,000 Jews. So what happened? Let me tell you what happened behind the scenes in that operation. What happened behind the scenes was like this. Israel spoke at that time to the general of Ethiopia, said, we want permission to land our planes in Ethiopia. So this general said, who was the dictator of Ethiopia, he said, I'll let you land your planes peacefully under two conditions. Number one, you deposit $5 million in my private bank account. Okay, that's not a big deal. You know, Jews can get money together fast when they want it. They got $5 million, they deposited. But the second request was harder. He said, I want George Bush the President of the United States, not George W. Bush.
Senior.
George Bush, right, 42, what do they call him? George Bush, the father, who was President of the United States. I want him to personally call me and request from me that I give Israel permission to land the planes. Why do you think he wanted that? Well, number one, he wanted the kavod, he wanted the honor. The President of the United States calls him up and makes a personal request. But it was deeper than that. Ethiopia is a Muslim country. And if Ethiopia is going to give permission for Israel to land El Al planes and take out 10,000 Jews, what do you think the Muslim countries that surround it are going to think? They're not going to be too happy. So this might be dangerous. But if it looks like George Bush is forcing the issue, is putting pressure, so they can get away with it. Look, what could I do? George Bush called me up. I didn't have a choice. I wanted American aid, So he said, I need George Bush to call me. Now, it's a good ending. It's a good ending. Don't worry. It's a good ending. People get nervous, Maybe it's not a good ending. But what happened was like this. There was a debate in the State Department. Should George Bush make that phone call or not? And the reason we know this is because there was an Orthodox Jew who happened to be in the debate. So he told the story. There was a question, should George Bush Sr. make this phone call to this general in Ethiopia and request from him that Israel be allowed to land planes? So there was a Security Council meeting. There was a Security Council meeting of 13 members of this particular group, and their job was to vote as to whether or not George Bush should make the call. So they discussed it back and forth, and some say you should do it, it's good, let's help Israel, let's help the Jews. Some of them said, no, what are you talking about? Why should we get involved in this affair? It's not our business. We're going to get the Muslim countries upset at us. It might be an oil embargo. It's not a good thing to do. So finally they took a vote. There were 13 members in the room. They took a vote. 6 voted no. Do not make the phone call. 6 voted yes. Now, I'm not a mathematician. I'm a rabbi. My math skills are not great. That's probably why I'm a rabbi. But I know that 6 plus 6 is not 13. It's 12. One person in that room did not vote. That person who did not vote looked at the other members and said, before I vote, I want to say something. In 1955, I lived in a community called Harlem, New York. Does everybody know where Harlem is?
Yeah.
Does everybody know the color of the people who live in Harlem?
Yeah.
In 1955, I lived in Harlem. In that year, there was a fire. 3 little children were caught on the 3rd floor of an apartment building with no way to get out. A man on the street saw them, rushed up the stairs through the smoke at great danger to his own life, grabbed these 3 little children in his arm, and took them through the smoke down onto the street, saved their lives. Baruch Hashem, they were fine, the kids. And this man was okay. The father of these children rushed to the scene, sees what's happening, sees what this man did, and sees the man walking away. And he comes up to the man and he said, I have to thank you. You saved my children's lives. He says, okay, you don't have to thank me. I would have done it. Of course, who wouldn't save a child's life? He said, I have to thank you. I owe you something. Let me give you something. He said, I don't want anything. He said, but you saved their lives. I feel I need to pay you back. Nothing. The next day, this father sees this man again. He comes up to me and said, I couldn't sleep the whole night. You saved my children's lives. I cannot end it here. I owe you something. What can I do for you? So this man looks back at him and says, please, you don't owe me anything. It was a mitzvah. He was a black Jew from Ethiopia who lived in Harlem. The Security Council is voting. Six said, yes, make the phone call. Six said, no, do not make the phone call. This man says, my friends, I was one of those 3 children. And I'll tell you something. From 1955, 65, 75, 85, the last 33 years, I have always wondered what the word mitzvah means. Just the other day, I was informed that the word mitzvah actually means mitzvah. And it's a word that the Jews use for a good deed. 33 years ago, a Jew did a good deed for me. It's now my chance to do a good deed for the Jews. I vote yes. Make the phone call. George Bush made the phone call. Israeli planes landed. In one night, they took out 10,000 Ethiopian Jews. 1988. The Israelis. Let me ask you a question. Who gets the credit for that operation?
George Bush. That guy.
All 7 people that voted.
Well, certainly the Israeli Air Force and El Al and all the people who participated did an amazing job.
The man who rescued.
But what we didn't understand was 33 years ago, there had to be a fire. And in that fire, a man had to rescue 3 children. And that man had to identify himself as a Jew. And 33 years later, we understand why that act was so significant. Because as a result of that mitzvah, that he did that mitzvah. And said, let's save these Jews' lives. Let's get them out of Ethiopia. Sometimes, my friends, it takes 2 weeks. Sometimes it takes 10 years. Sometimes it takes 33 years. And sometimes it's going to take until Mashiach comes. But we have to understand that one day we're going to understand how everything is a manifestation of God's love. We just have to have the patience, the time to look, to see. You know, it's very interesting that when you visit somebody in the hospital, what are you supposed to do? The purpose of visiting the sick is really that you're supposed to pray for the sick. You're supposed to go to the hospital, and when you're there, you're supposed to daven, you're supposed to pray. Because when you see somebody going through pain, it brings out more feeling and emotion, and oftentimes your prayers are even greater, and even better. And our rabbis say something very fascinating. And this is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. When you visit someone who's sick in the hospital, you could talk to God in any language you want, whatever language you want. You could speak to God in Hebrew, speak to God in Aramaic, you can speak to God in Russian, you can even speak to God in Bukharian if you want. You can speak to God in any language. However, it says that's really only true when you're visiting somebody who is sick. When someone is not sick, or when someone is sick perhaps, but you're davening in the shul, the Beit Knesset, so you should try to daven in Hebrew if you can. You know why? Very deep reason. Because the angels understand Hebrew. They don't understand other languages. They just know Hebrew. And when you're not in the presence of a sick person, apparently the way it works is that an angel participates to take your words and present it before God. So words are even more powerful if it's in Hebrew. It doesn't mean that your words are not effective, they're not in Hebrew. Believe me, any prayer from the heart will be heard. But it says the most powerful prayer will be one that's in Hebrew. Why? Because the angels understand the Hebrew, and they'll take it, and they'll transport it to God. It says when you're in the presence of a sick person, you can daven in any language you want. You know why? Because God is right there. So the Shekhinah is present. God's presence is right at the head of the sick person. So God's right there. So you can talk to Him. And if He's there, believe me, God knows every language. Talk whatever language you want. He knows what you're saying. So our rabbis ask a question. They say, why is it? How come the Shekhinah is there when someone is sick? Why does God come so close to a sick person? Is it just something Kabbalistic? Is it just like magical? Why is it? You know what the answer? The reason God is so close is because when a person is sick, he lets God in. God wants to be really close to us. The problem is, often in life, we don't bring him in. We think we could do it ourselves. We're strong enough. We don't need God. We don't need anybody. But I'll tell you something. When a person is sick, they bring God into their lives. And when they bring God in, God is there. So when you're in the hospital, you can speak to God and pray whatever language you want because God is so close. But I think we learned something very important from this. What we learned from this is that when things happen to us in this world that are painful and difficult, oftentimes it's God's way of saying to us, bring me into your life. How often in life do we go on with our normal schedule and try to accomplish our whatever, college and work, and just do what we're doing without even thinking how much we really need Hashem. But when something happens that's painful, a sickness, whatever it might be, that causes us to have to stop and to think and to bring God in. So God says, listen, sometimes when I bring pain into your life, the reason I'm bringing it is because I want you to bring me in. I want you to be more aware of me. And the pain and the suffering is a sign of my love for you. I taught in yeshiva before. I used to teach, before I started this organization, I was teaching in yeshiva. And sometimes while I'm teaching, I would have students who fall asleep. So I remember there was one student, and as soon as I started to speak, he would fall asleep. He was a high school boy. And he would put his head on his, like this, put his down jacket over his head, and he would fall asleep. And I always try to wake him up. And one time I succeeded in waking him up. And I woke him up. He was such a disaster. It was so all over the place. I said to him, look, go back to sleep. But there are some students who you don't let them go back to sleep. You know why? Because you love them too much. And you see their potential. And you say, I can't let you sleep because the message I want to give to you is too important. Now God says the same thing to us. It's so easy in this world to go through life and just not think about God. But God says, if you do that, you're going to miss the whole point of life. The whole point of life is to have a relationship with me. A relationship which is going to transform you and enable you to know me forever. But if you don't work out in this world, how am I going to get to know you in the next world? So I got to wake you up sometimes. I got to remind you that I'm there. I got to bring a little pain in your life. I got to bring a little financial suffering into your life. I have to show you that you need me. Because it's how often, when we need God, do we bring him in? So you might say to me like this, well, Rabbi, I would prefer that God not care about me so much. God, I'd rather forgo the suffering and just take a nice, pleasant ride through this world. But you know what God's response to that is? God's response is like this. Imagine the following story. Man has a son, and he gives his son a credit card, $50,000 credit line, and he says to him, listen, I want you to use this credit card to pay for your tuition, pay for your dorm room, pay for your books, pay for all the things that you need for college. So this kid takes the $50,000 credit card, and instead of going to the admissions office, he goes to the BMW dealer, and he leases a 2010 shiny BMW. And then he goes to another dealer at the other corner, which doesn't necessarily have a nice a shop as the BMW dealer, and he buys some other type of substances, and he indulges in those substances while he's driving his BMW. Going 90 miles an hour, he crashes into a telephone pole and ends up in the ICU unit in the hospital. He's unconscious for a while. Finally, he gains consciousness. Doctors say he's going to be okay. Close call. His father is there. Here's his Baruch Hashem. He's going to be all right. First thing his father does, he goes to the phone. He dials the number of the credit card company, cancels the credit card. The boy wakes up just as he's canceling the credit card. He said, what are you doing? He said, canceling a credit card. He says, why are you doing that? Why am I doing that? Look at you. What do you think? Well, what do you think I'm doing it for? He says to him, listen, Dad, it's my life and I'll do with it what I want. His father turns to him and says, listen, you know, it might be your life, but I love you too much to allow you to kill yourself. God looks at us and says the same thing. If it were up to you, if it were up to me, we might choose the most easy path in life. Path of least resistance. Path of most comfort. But in such a path, we might never have to bring God into our lives. And God says to us, listen, I love you too much for that. You mean too much to me. I want to give you the greatest gift I can give you forever, which is to know me. But if you're not going to work to know me in this world, it's going to be very difficult to know me in the next world. So I love you too much to allow you to kill yourself. I won't do that to you. Pain and suffering oftentimes is God's way of reminding us that we have to bring Him in. And it's so true. We forget that often. Why do we forget it? I'm going to end with this story. It's a famous piece of Talmud. You've probably heard it before, but I'm going to just take you to a different dimension in it. It's a story about Rabbi Akiva. It says one time, Rabbi Akiva, the great sage Rabbi Akiva, he came to a certain town at night, and it was dark, and he needed a place to sleep. But no one gave him a place to sleep. No place in the town for him. What did Rabbi Akiva say? Everything that God does has to be for the good. So he went out in the field, and he put his tent over there in the field. It says, he had with him a rooster, a donkey, and a candle. 3 things. He had a rooster, he had a donkey, and a candle. I guess the 3 things you need when you go camping. You need your rooster to wake you up in the morning. You need a candle.
Donkey to carry your stuff.
Donkey to carry your stuff. That's right. That's like his Hummer. Now what happened? A wind came out and blew out the candle. A cat came, ate the rooster. Wow, real bad day. Bad day for this guy. A lion came and ate his donkey. What did Rabbi Akiva say? Amar called the Avid Rachmana Latov of it. Everything that God does is for the good. That night, a group of Roman soldiers came to the town. Shavi Lamasa took all the townspeople captive. But they didn't see Rabbi Akiva. Why?
In the field.
Because he was in the field.
With no light.
His light had blown out. There was no rooster to make noise, and no donkey to bray. Amrei, l'chuma shekarish baruch hu hava akol latova. Rabbi Akiva said, "Oh, look how good Hashem is. Everything was for the good." Beautiful story. We learn from this, number 1, that we're supposed to train ourselves in life to say, Kol masha avid rachman latov of it. Everything that God does is for the good. Baruch pum chalomar. Train your mouth to say that. Practice saying it. Make yourself say it. Everything that God does is for the good. Because if you don't practice saying it, and you don't practice it on the little things, when the big things happen, it's going to be very difficult to say it. Rabbi Akiva had trained himself to look at life in a way where everything that happens, he's able to say, God, I know there's a goodness here. I know that something has to be good behind what you're doing. But you have to train yourself to do it. You have to practice. You always practice. When you miss the bus, Hashem, it's for the good. Right? You spill the orange juice, Hashem, it's for the good. Stub your toe, Hashem, it's for the good. Rabbi Akiva trained himself to say it. And when a big thing happened, he was ready for it. Now, our rabbis take this a little deeper. And they say like this. Question. Wow, what an interesting story. He's camping with a donkey, a candle, and a rooster. And in one night, the wind blows out the candle. A cat eats the rooster, and a lion attacks the donkey. That's strange. It doesn't normally happen. So our rabbis say, it didn't really happen. Maybe it was just a story, a metaphor to teach us something. What's it trying to teach us? It's trying to teach us that sometimes in life, it's very difficult to find God when we're suffering and in pain for three reasons. Sometimes it's very difficult because we're in a lot of pain. And when you're in a lot of pain, it's sometimes very difficult to be philosophical. And they say that's the symbolism, maybe, of a lion eating the donkey. A donkey always represents the idea of something very, very physical. It's a very physical animal. It does a lot of heavy loads, labor. It's a beast of burden. In fact, the word for donkey in Hebrew is a chamor. Same word as chomriyut. Chomriyut in Hebrew means like dirt. So sometimes it's very difficult to find God when things are difficult, because we're in physical pain. And when a person is in physical pain, it's hard to think. So I'll tell you something, my friends. When you are in physical pain, or we are in physical pain, or somebody is in physical pain, it's a challenge, because it takes a lot of work to say, Shem, I know you're there. And I'll tell you a trick. When somebody else is in physical pain, don't say to them while they're in pain, I know it's for the good. Think it, but don't say it. What do you say when someone's in a lot of physical pain?
It's going to be all.
You say, are you all right? What can I do for you? You must be in so much pain. But never say, I know it's going to be for the good. No one wants to hear that then. But that's one way. We have to realize that physical pain sometimes prevents us from realizing that everything's for the good. The second thing, it says that the wind blew out the candle. That's a metaphor, some say, for a candle is always the idea of the seichel, the mind. Sometimes it's difficult to find God when things go difficult in our lives, when things are painful, because the pain doesn't allow us to think clearly. We can think clearly, Baruch Hashem, as we're sitting here tonight, Thursday night, right, and everything is, Baruch Hashem, good. But sometimes when we're in, stress and pain, it's difficult to have clarity of thought. Or we don't think so clearly. So we have to catch ourselves and train ourselves to realize that in those times, we make sure that we've conditioned ourselves to say everything's for the good. Because when we're under a lot of stress, sometimes it's hard to see it. It's like the wind blowing out the candle. The wind blowing out the light of the mind. And the third thing is very interesting, is the cat eats the rooster. A rooster in Jewish thought oftentimes represents the neshama, the soul. Because a rooster is a very interesting animal. Did you know that? When does a rooster crow?
Morning.
What time in the morning?
Sunrise.
At sunrise or the moment before sunrise. The rooster has the ability to see what's not there. It's called binah. There's the ability to, almost like the soul, to see beyond the physical. And that's why the soul is oftentimes compared to the rooster. A cat eating the rooster is symbolic of an idea. A cat. Does anybody like cats?
Yeah.
I like cats. A lot of people don't like cats. You know why? Because they're very sneaky. They're very sneaky. The cat, oftentimes in Jewish literature, represents the idea of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination trying to confuse you, trying to confuse your soul. So it says that the cat eats the rooster, It's the idea that sometimes it's difficult to see God when things are tough in our life. Why? Because the Yetzer Hara confuses our soul. Rather than realizing, God, I know it's from you and it's a manifestation of your love, the Yetzer Hara says, like, God doesn't exist. Why would God do such a thing to you? If God is all loving, why do you bring this pain? The Yetzer Hara tries to confuse you. So sometimes it's difficult to find God because we get confused, and the Neshama gets confused by the Yetzer Hara. So our rabbis are teaching us something very important. That one of the great challenges of this world is to realize that pain, suffering, is God's way of speaking to us. But it's a challenge, because it's difficult to have clarity at those moments. But in order to pass the tests, and to stand up, and to realize that everything is for the good, you got to train yourself. If you want to be a good athlete, you have to go to the gym and work out. If you want to be a good pianist, you have to make sure you do a lot of practicing. If you want to be a good artist, you better do a lot of drawing. If you want to pass the test of life, to realize that everything is a manifestation of God's love, you have to train yourself to say, Kol man da'avid rakman l'tov avid, that everything that Hashem does is for the good. And if you could do that, wow, it's a different world. It's a purposeful world, right? It's a world where we can realize that Hashem is behind everything, and there's nothing bad. This class is called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. But I'm going to tell you something. In Hebrew, the word for bad is ra. Ra doesn't mean bad. The word ra in Hebrew means, does anyone know what it really means? Ra means to be disconnected. There's a note that we blow on Rosh Hashanah called the truah. Do you hear the word ra in there? Truah. The note sounds like this. Ta, ta, ta. It's disconnected from one to the other. What evil is, or what ra is, God can never bring bad into the world. Bad is our thinking when we realize that we're not connected to God, when we don't see God's hand. It appears to be bad, but there's no bad there at all. So sometimes, my friend, it takes 2 weeks, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 33 years. Sometimes it's going to take till Mashiach comes. But I guarantee you, one day we're going to understand that anything that we thought was bad was not bad at all. It was just our perspective. We weren't connected. We didn't see God's hand. But if we could see God's hand, wow, it's a different world. It's a different world. And it's a meaningful world, it's a purposeful world. And it's a world that we can walk through with confidence and rise to the challenges that God's going to give us. And take the pain and realize, God, I know it's purposeful, I know it's meaningful. And use it as a way to come close to God and to love God. And if we could do that, I guarantee you, we're in for good lives and happy lives. And maybe God won't have to wake us up so much either, because we've already been woken up ourselves. Thank you for listening, everybody. I've enjoyed talking to you.